Well, I guess, Jim, to start with, so in Texas, we're big fans of high school football, of high school sports. You were a hell of an athlete when you were in high school at White Bear. I would love to know, what are your memories back in the day of not only football, but track? I mean, you won a state title in track, I think, high jump. What are your memories from back in White Bear days?
Well, see, first of all, my mom and dad raised me as a good Catholic young boy. So I went to a Catholic grade school, and then they wanted me to go to Hill High School, which was a all boys taught by Christian Brothers Catholic school. So I went there for 2 years. And what happened was I played football my freshman and sophomore year, and at that time, nobody in the freshman and sophomore year played on varsity. Then I played basketball, baseball my freshman year, and then my sophomore year, I wound up playing football, hockey, and track, because I tried them all. And so the beginning of my junior year, I came back expecting to start either at safety or at a flanker for Hill, and I looked at the players' positioning on the chalkboard, and I was 7th team tailback out of 7 tailbacks. So I went to the head coach, a guy named Bob Sullivan, and I said, "Coach," I said, "how did I get 7th team tailback?" And he said, "Oh, don't worry about that. You're going to be kicking for us and punting." And I said, "No, I'm not." And he said, "Why?" I said, "I'm going to White Bear. Goodbye." And I left that very afternoon, went to White Bear. I lost 1 year of eligibility because I transferred, and I lived in the same, home. It's not like you're transferring to a different city. So I couldn't play my junior year. So the only football I played my senior year was at White Bear. And I was fortunate we had a real good team. We were ranked 3rd in the state, and I was the leading scorer and leading pass receiver, and had a good team, and we wound up getting beat for the championship with a 97-yard touchdown run with about 25 seconds left to go. So
you're kidding.
Yeah, so then I played basketball, and we just about got to the state tournament. We got beat by a team that went into the state tournament, and then track, I was undefeated as a high jumper. So I had the state indoor championship record at 6'4" and a quarter, and then I wound up winning the outdoor high jump champ, and then I went to the University of Minnesota, played football as a walk-on, and wound up high jumping there too. So I lettered in both sports, and my best jump was 6'7.5".
That's crazy. Wow.
Yeah.
Minnesota's where you met Greg.
Yes.
Yeah, Greg was on that team as well.
Yeah, Greg was a walk-on at the University of Minnesota. Good quarterback, a little small, 6 feet, about 175 pounds, and they moved him from quarterback to defensive secondary, and he knew he wasn't going to play quarterback, so after his sophomore year, he transferred to Wyoming, and he wound up playing a little bit there at quarterback, and then I didn't see him again until after we were done with our collegiate careers, and then he called me and said, "Hey," he said, "my dad's having a wrestling camp, and he's bringing in Ken Patera, who just got done with the Olympics in Germany, and he's going to have a Iranian named Khosrow Vaziri, and then it's you and me and a former football player from Minnesota and a former NFL player by the name of Bob Bruggers, and then he's going to have the state high school Catholic wrestling champion Ric Flair." So I said, "Well, I might as well do something." I wanted to go back to school and get my degree, but then I thought, Jesus, this is athletic, and I was athletic enough that I thought I could, probably do okay. I had no idea what I was doing, and then so we went through a camp of about 8 weeks long, and it was 6 days a week, and it was 6 hours a day, and I mean, Vern had a guy named Billy Robinson, who was a European heavyweight champion, and his specialty was submission holds. So Gadi, what happened was he would get in the ring, and then he'd hurt you no matter what he'd do. He'd grab your wrist or your neck or your ankle or whatever.
Like a snake and take you.
It was just horrible. So I thought, geez, what am I getting myself into? So finally, I think I had my first match December 27th, 1972.
Wow.
And I wrestled in Moorhead, Minnesota, and I wrestled another collegiate wrestling star his name was Dennis Stamp, and I had a 20-minute draw. And I thought I was horrible. I thought, geez, and here was my first match. So I came into the locker room and I kicked the garbage can over, and the old timers there, Dusty Rhodes was there, and he said, Jimmy, he said, what the hell's the matter with you? And I said, well, I had this match, and I thought, and he says, let me tell you one thing. He says, you're going to have a lot of stinkers during your career, so get used to it. He says, hurry up and take a shower. We got to get on the road. And that was his advice. And, lo and behold, I wrestled 28 years. I had 5,000 matches during that time. And I did have a few stinkers, but not a lot, But I was fortunate that I had such great competition and great talent to work with. Some of the guys were incredible.
You won. You won your first tag team title with Mike George.
Yes.
Well, was that territory? That was early days.
Yeah, I started for about 4 months in Minnesota, and Vern realized, none of us were good enough to stay in the AWA because they all had top of the talent. They had Nick Bockwinkel and the Crusher and Billy Robinson and Mad Dog Vachon, and so they sent us out. So Flair went to North Carolina. I think Ken Patera went to Oklahoma or Texas, and then I went to Kansas City, Central States, and I remember wrestling every single day, twice a day, and I remember the first check I got, this guy named Moody, who was the referee, threw me this little envelope like that. It was about that big, and I looked like that was that. So I opened it up, and I saw my check for the whole week, which was 7 days, 14 wrestling matches, and I made $150.
Oh.
They paid me like $27 a match, and I said, holy Jesus, I spent that much on beer, and I had a $145 efficiency apartment, and I had a bed that was 2 air mattresses, one on top of the other, and my main meal was eggs in the morning, and then I'd have hot dogs in the afternoon, and then my mom taught me how to cook a chicken. So I had a couple chickens a week, and that's the way I lived, but I learned a lot, the opportunity. Mike was a great guy, and, it's funny, I lost all touch with him. I know he's in St. Joe, Missouri, and I know he used to work at the racetrack. Wow. And I just, I've tried calling down there, and nobody, you call the police department and say, yeah, this is my name is Jim Brunzell. My partner used to be Mike George. Can I get his telephone number? Oh, I'm sorry, we can't give that out. Boom, they hang up on you, so. But he was, and we were down there, I was down there about 10 months. And we wrestled Roger Kirby and Lord Alfred Hayes for the Central States Tag Team Championship when we won. And it's funny because in the wrestling magazines, they had Mike George and I ahead of the tag team in the AWA. And I thought we were rated like second, and they were third. And I thought, oh boy, Vern's going to love this. So, but it was a good opportunity. And when you're young like that, the more matches you have, you learn your trade. It's like anything else. And I had an opportunity in Kansas City to see the Briscoes and the Funks, and I watched all the matches, and I pick a little thing out of here and this and that. And yeah, I was very fortunate to have that opportunity. and I was very fortunate that I never really got seriously injured other than a couple concussions that I had. And then Greg Valentine broke my hand in Rockford, Illinois in 1986 or 87. And Brian Blair says to me, we were tag team then, and he says, "Oh, you can't go home." I says, "Brian, I got a broken hand. What do you want me to do? Do you want me to spit on it and wrap it up in, toilet paper and go out in the mat?" So I went home, and they couldn't put the cast on for a day because my hand swelled up. So they put a cast on the next day, and the Killer Bees won more matches with a loaded cast. I'd knock these guys silly, coming off the ropes. And it was sort of a blessing in disguise. But, so, the AWA was the greatest territory to wrestle in. Greg and I achieved a lot of success there because we had great talent. We had Nick Bockwinkel, Bobby Heenan, Bobby Duncombe, Jack Lanza, Ray Stevens, Pat Patterson, Buddy Wolf. I mean, there was incredible talent there. So you couldn't help but learn. Billy Superstar Graham was there, and I learned a lot. And then they put Greg and I together, and we did really well for about 4 or 5 years. And I was sort of getting tired of the tag team situation, and I just thought, I'm going to go. So I told Vern I'm going to go to Charlotte, North Carolina, the Mid-Atlantic, just to get away. And he said, okay. So I went there for 18 months, and I wound up...
Didn't you win a heavyweight title there?
Yeah, I won the Mid-Atlantic Championship, and I think I beat Ray Stevens, and then I had an ongoing feud with Iron Schnook, Khosrow Vaziri, and also with Ken Patera. So I was there for about 18 months, and there again, you wrestled every single day. And the only good thing about North Carolina was the towns were, within 200 miles. So you could get home that night at, 12:30, 1 o'clock, rather than, New York, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But it was good in the Mid-Atlantic, and I made good money. And I remember I got fired in the Mid-Atlantic because George Scott was the booker, and he had booked me against Khosrow Vaziri, and the Iron Sheik, he had beat me with this loaded boot. He used to load his boot, kick his boot, and then, the ref wouldn't see you, and then boom, he'd kick you in the throat or something. Boom, down you go, 1, 2, 3. So he beat me on TV. So about a week later, I wrestled him on TV. I put the sleeper on him, and he went down, and I took his boot off. So I got his boot, and I go do an interview, and I said, I'm going to get my title back, and I'm going to wear his boot and beat him. So about a week or two later, I'm wrestling Khosrow around the Horn in almost every town, and this was Roanoke, Virginia, and it was on a Saturday afternoon, and and we had to wrestle that night in Charlotte. So I get there, and I didn't know what the finish was going to be. So I said to Sandy Scott, who was the agent there, I said, "What's the finish?" And Sandy said to me, "Didn't George tell you?" And I said, "No." I said, "What is it?" And he said, "Well, George wants you to go an hour draw Broadway." I said, "You got to be kidding me." I said, "Here, I've got his loaded boot, and I can't beat him with my own ability plus his loaded boot?" "Well, George thinks we'll confuse the crowd." And I said, "Yeah, you'll confuse the crowd." And I said, "You might as well dig a hole right in the middle of the ring and bury me, because Jumpin' Jim Brunzell will be dead after that." So we had a match, and honest God, it was just like pulling teeth without Novocaine. He was so hard to work with, Khosrow. And then this went on for about a week or two, and we were wrestling in this small little town, and it was a big Indian reservation, and it was nothing but Native Americans watching the match, so everything was real quiet. And Sandy Scott, I apologize for that. Jimmy, I'm doing an interview. I'll be right back. I'll call you back. That was Jim Morris, Hillbilly Jim, from Kentucky. He's pissed at me. But getting back, so Cosmo and I were booked in this little town in this Indian reservation, and all of a sudden they said, an hour draw, and I said, you gotta be kidding me. So we have a match. Somehow or other, Cosmo goes out of the ring awkwardly, and he's selling his back, and he says, oh, Jim, I hurt my back, I'm hurting my back. And I said, well, can you go on? And he says, I don't think so. So we both got counted out, counted out outside of the ring, a 10 count. So the next morning, I get a call from the office, and they said, Jim, George wants to talk to you. It's George Scott. So I go in there, and I says, George, what's up? And he says, I wanted you guys to do our draw last night in that town. And I said, I know. I said, we were going to do one, but Cosmo got hurt. And he says, well, I just talked to Cos, and he said he wasn't hurt at all. So I got fired.
Wow.
So,
and that's how you go back to AWA.
Yeah. So from there, the opportunity wasn't available. So I worked for about 4 weeks in Atlanta.
Okay, yeah.
And this was 1980.
Is that with Jim?
Yeah, Jim Barnett.
Yeah.
Yeah. And oh boy, have you heard stories about Jim Barnett?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, here's the way he used to talk. He said, Jimsy, he'd say, what do you want to do in your career? What do you want to be? And I said, Jim, the only way you're going to make money, the best money in this business, is being a champion. And I said, I'd love to, be a heavyweight champion. And he says, that's a possibility, and then, but I said, right now I want to go home to Minnesota because I miss it. And he says, Jim, Jimsy, he said, if you go back to Minnesota, it'll be the biggest mistake you've made in your wrestling career. Mark my words. And I said, well, I'm going back. So I left. They tagged Greg and I up, and then we went against the East-West Connection, Adrian Adonis.
Yeah.
And I made $85,000. It was the biggest year I ever had. And the next time I saw Jim Barnett, I said, Jim, you were wrong. I said, that was the best move I ever made. Oh, God, he said, and he walked away, And then he was up in New York, he was working up in New York. But, I had a good run with Greg again, and what happened was, Hulk Hogan was in the AWA and just set the territory on fire. I mean, he was, without a doubt, he was the golden goose. And for some reason, Vern never wanted to give him the belt from Bockwinkel, and they always had these great matches, but, Nick could get disqualified or Hulk could get disqualified. So Hulk just says, hey, and plus they had sold T-shirts, Hulk Hogan, the real champion, it said on it. And Vern owed Hulk $40,000 for all these T-shirts and didn't pay him. So Hulk said, Vern, listen, I know this and this and that, and he says, you're not going to give me the belt, just give me my money, I'm going to New York. And Vern didn't pay him the money, so Hulk left. And at this time, Vince McMahon, before Vince McMahon took over with the WWE, there was 26 territories in the United States that if you were a pro wrestler, you could wrestle at. And the problem was, when Vince took over, he was the great thing about Vince did, and this was his diamond in the rough, everything. I mean, this was Dick Ebersol, who ran ABC Wide World of Sports, did the producing for the wrestling show, WWE, and nobody could compete with that. I mean, they'd spend $200,000 a show, and like Vern Gagne and all these other ones, they'd spend $2,500 on their TV show, and then people would see the wrestling product, and they'd say, holy Jesus, that WWE, God almighty, they got to be the best. And that's what happened. So all the talent got sucked away from all those territories, and at that time, our AWA, I mean, we lost Bobby Heenan, and we lost Jesse Ventura, and and Rick Martel and Gene Okerlund, the announcer. And it was, they getting to the point where there wasn't any real talent that wasn't in the WWE. So I told Vern, I said, if you want me, I owned the gym at the time, and I needed to make X amount of dollars outside of the gym to help make the gym go. And I said, Vern, here's the deal. I said, I need a personal guarantee from you, contract. Otherwise, I'm going to New York. He says, well, how much do you want? And I said, $95,000 a year. And he says, you're not worth it. Go. So I left. Never looked back. and Greg says, oh God, you can't go and this and that. And I said, Greg, I can't stay, So I went to New York, and what a rude awakening that was, because there was 60 guys there, and I mean they were all top guys from all over the country, and they ran 3 towns a night, and they run 20 guys in each town. And for 3.5 years, they waited about 6 months to put Brian Blair and I together as the Killer Bees. Well, the Killer Bees wrestled on average for 3.5 years, 27 days a month.
Wow.
We were on the road. And it was just, oh my gosh, it was horrendous. And there was so much drug abuse. I mean, it was just, not only steroids, but there was cocaine, and there was, sleeping pills, and guys were hurt, so they're taking, at that time it was called Vicodin. That was the big painkiller then. And then I remember, like I mentioned before, I don't know if we were on air, but there was a number of guys who died early, and it was because of substance abuse. I mean, they were, smoking $500 worth of crack a night, every single night. And then they, their marriages and their families were just torn apart and fractured and everything, and it was a horrible time in the WWE, and I'm talking about 86, 87, 88. And Vince sort of cracked down. He said, we're going to have drug tests, and if you test positive, you're going to be suspended without pay, and then if you get tested positive again, we're going to put you in a rehab, and that was a big joke. I mean, the guys who were incidental got caught and got suspended for 6 weeks, and the main event guys never. They were snorting coke with Vince in the parties. So
yeah, for us fans, I mean, all we saw was WrestleManias and shows. I mean, we weren't privy to all the behind the scenes.
Well, nobody really was. I mean, it was a well-oiled machine. Guys knew what they were going to get themselves into, in terms of what it was required. But at that time, like I said, that's the only place to wrestle. And then they had the WW or whatever, NWC. No, what was it? WWC or something like that.
With Bischoff.
Yeah.
Did you ever get courted?
No, I wouldn't work for him anyhow. When I left WWE, I was done. I did independence for a little bit, and I wound up having a match on my 50th birthday, and it was August 13th, 1999, and I was wrestling, God bless him and rest his soul, Jim Neidhart. And we were in a small town that Ken Patera promoted, and Kenny was running indie matches, and Jim Neidhart was out of it. I mean, he was out of it, and he damn near broke my neck. And he was like 5'10" and 275, and he was a shot putter in college, and he was a hell of a shot putter, but he was a hell on wheels. I mean, he was a maniac. He was just so. After that, I walked out of that ring and I said, that's it, I'm not doing it again. And because I had, I was 50 years old, and I started wrestling when I was 22. So you have so much injury, I mean, you're limping and stuff like that. And the other day, I just had my 11th surgery after. I've had 6 surgeries on my knees. I've had them both replaced. And I've had 3 surgeries on my shoulders. I had them both replaced, and I've had my hip replaced. And then 2.5 weeks ago, I had a depressed nerve in my elbow. It was called the ulnar nerve, and this hand was numb, and I had no strength in the hand, so they cut my elbow and they retunneled it. It's funny because you think nerves, how the hell can you see nerves? But they use this ultrasound machine and it'll show these little white things, and that's your nerves. So they wound up retunneling that and sewed it up, and now I've got, I still feel a little stiffness, but nothing like before. I couldn't
still throw a right hook if you need to.
Not really. I can barely lift the coffee carafe in the morning. I said, honey, you better have a couple more cups of coffee so I can lift this thing up. But other than that, I was very fortunate. I had a tremendous career. I thank the Lord for my wife. It was hard being on the road, and she did such a great job with the kids. You're gone 27 days a month, and then you come home for 3 days. And the first day I was just completely, boom, I'd hit the, just rest. And then the next day we'd do something. And then that night I had to pack. And then third day, I probably had to leave that afternoon. So it wasn't very easy.
I would love for you to share more about, your wife, Mary, about being able to have someone who obviously stuck with you this whole time. And I feel like Minneapolis is, you stayed here. You guys have always lived here. Does the place help keep that alive? So many guys, so many guys whose marriages dissolved.
Well, I think, if you have a real true partnership, you go through things and it's a give and take each way. And at that time, Mary realized that I had to be on the road. So, and we did what we had to do, in terms of, keeping up on the bills and putting money aside and she did a great job with the kids, because both my kids, were, you couldn't ask for any more. My daughter got 2 master's degree, and she's got a wonderful position at the White Bear Lake School District. She controls the itinerary and from all the kids from when they're in kindergarten till 12th grade, all their what they have to do in matter of graduating and what courses they have to take and everything like that. And then Jimmy, as you know, has been involved with film festivals, and that's been his love. And I was very fortunate. They were both wonderful kids. So they still love their daddy.
Yeah, we saw that earlier. Yeah. I love that. So I've got to ask you, your drop kick's one of the most famous drop kicks ever. Is there a person you landed that drop kick perfectly? You'll never forget, I drop kicked.
Oh, geez. Well, I knocked out a couple guys. I knocked them dizzy. They hit, boom. One was Bockwinkel. Dory Funk. 2 of the best pictures of drop kicks that I have were against Dory Funk, and one I'll show you afterwards. It was at C&E outdoor stadium in Toronto, Canada, and they had 70,000 people there that night. And the main event was Hulk Hogan against Paul, Mr. Wonderful Orndorff, and Brian and I went against the Funk brothers, Jesse Funk, who was a guy named Jesse Barr, and Dory Funk. So we had a hell of a match. And during the course of the match, I hit Dory before he boom, he come off the ropes, and I hit him right smack in the head. Boom, and down he went. And the next day, they put the paper on your door at the hotel. So I grabbed the paper. On the front page, they had the big picture of my drop kick. And I thought, holy Jesus, it's never happened, And it was a perfect drop kick. So I've used that picture so many times, and it took me 6 weeks to get the print from this guy, and I told him I'd give you all the, credit for taking it, and, if you want money. And he didn't want money, but he just said, just mention my name, and sure enough, I was blessed. I always wanted to. Well, when I was growing up, my best friend was 6'4" when we were 12 years old, and I was like 5'9", And we used to play basketball, football, and he was a shot putter, and in track, and I says, his name was Nick Hartzell, he's still around, and he went to Notre Dame and broke his ankle and knocked up his girlfriend, so he didn't play much football, but he was a heck of a guy, and I tell you, we did everything together, and I look back at that, and it's funny because, the kids you go to high school with, or become real close with, you never see them. After college, you make a whole different set of friends and everything, and I probably forgot to end the story, but I have a little bit of dementia, as my wife will say. She'll say, "Oh, Jim," she says, "you know where you're going?" And I says, "Where are we going?" But that's, I think anybody who wrestles over a period of time, has a little bit of, memory problem. All my friends, all of them. And I have I have a number of friends that are just waiting for CTE to happen to their brain because, you take, if you were to think like having even 1,000 matches in wrestling, and somebody would say to me, "How do you recover from those?" He says, "How does it feel to take those bumps in the ring?" And I said, "Well, I got an idea." He said, "Every morning when you get up, get out of bed, and if you have a carpeted floor, just fall back on your back every morning, just once, and see how you feel after a week, and then do that for 20 years." And then they get a little comparison.
So I've got to ask, what's it like seeing Rick still wrestling, Ric Flair's still, well, not the last couple of years, but I mean deep into his age. I mean Hulk too. I mean seeing some of these guys go long. How do you deal with that? That must be kind of crazy to see some of these guys do this still.
Well, Ric Flair is totally unique in that his whole life revolved around wrestling. Everything. I mean, he needs that adoration, and he needs the spotlight for him to be himself. And I love Rick, and we've been dear friends, and we had some incredible matches. As a matter of fact, he and I did 3-hour draws in Charlotte, and it was an incredible match. He was great, and he was a great worker, but he needed that limelight. He needed that the applause, and I realized that if you're good at what you do, that's a blessing. But sooner or later, you're just going to have to realize that's the end of that part of your life, and you got to go on. And I'm sure Rick would say this too, and I'll say it now. Rick had an incredible wrestling career. He probably made, I would say, $15 million in his career, and he probably spent $20 million. So that's why he's still out there hawking the, whatever the insurance is now, and he's such a character. My God, and I hear that woof all the time. You hear it I hear it at the University of Minnesota football games, and he says, I'm supposed to get paid. I think it's 75 cents every time they do that. Well, I'm sure they do it 1,000 times a day around the world. He doesn't get a dime.
What is it in the water in Minnesota? There's so many great wrestlers from here. Macho Man, wasn't he from around the corner?
No, he was from Illinois. But Randy was very good. Randy wrestled down in Tennessee and Kentucky, and and he came to the WWE, and he was the Macho Man, and then he, had Elizabeth with him. He was a great guy, great talent, and very unique in that he wasn't that big. He and I were about the same size. He was probably even lighter than me, but he had that mannerism and that charisma, and the way he talked. I remember, and you can look this up on YouTube. You can look a match up between Randy Savage and me, and I think it was on one of the first Monday Night Raws, and he beat me with the big dive off the top, with the big elbow. Oh boy, Christ, that hurt too. I mean, when you get a guy, 220 coming off, 10 feet in the air, and then he cups his elbow and he hits you right across the chest. It knocks the snot out of you, So we had a hell of a match, and after the match, I came through and I'll tell you right off the bat, he grabbed a headlock on me in the very beginning, and I shot him off, and I leapfrogged, and I hit him in the mouth with a drop kick, and he comes up splitting blood, and I thought, oh God, I knocked his teeth out, and I thought, oh boy, he's going to throw the ring full of right hooks, but he said, okay, I'm okay. He said, come on, Jimmy, so I said, okay, here we go, and we had a hell of a match, and as we walked through the apron or in the curtain to walk back, Vince McMahon was there, and I don't know if he was blowing smoke up our ass or not, but he says, fellas, I want to tell you that's the best TV match I've seen. And I thought, well, good. Don't get in the habit of it, because I don't want to do a job every weekend.
That's so amazing. Did you ever get to wrestle in Texas?
I did. I wrestled in Texas with WWE. I wrestled in Dallas. What's that other town that, god dang, where all the funks come from? Texas.
Abilene?
No. God dang it.
Amarillo.
God,
up north, Amarillo.
Yeah, Amarillo. I wrestled in Houston, and I wrestled in San Antonio, but it was during the time with the WWE where they'd come in and they'd do like 3 or 4 towns in the state, boom, and then they wouldn't be back because at that same time, the Von Erichs, I think, were still trying to, put something together. But my son, Jimmy, just came back. He was in Austin. I'm sure you guys. He was down in Austin for 6 years.
Yeah.
And I went down there a couple times, and I thought Austin was great. I mean, it was the most liberal city in Texas, so that's why I liked it. And then when we moved Jimmy from Austin to Oxford, Mississippi, I said, oh God, here we go. But Oxford, Mississippi was an incredible town.
College town, lovely.
Oh, Ole Miss, and I remember I went there for a couple days. I helped Jimmy move his gear up. I drove the doggone U-Haul that only goes 72 miles an hour, and he's going 80 down the highway, and I'm calling him on his cell phone. I said, Jim, slow down, what you got, dang it? And I says, you got a Minnesota plate, son, you'll get a ticket, and they'll throw you in jail. So, but he was down there, and it was funny because Oxford, being a college town, has more millionaires than any other city in Mississippi.
Yeah, Eli Manning lives there.
Yeah. And they had his. They had the speed limit was 18. I think that was his number. Yeah, he was. Ole Miss. Matter of fact, they had some good team. They got a good team right now too.
Very good. Yeah. I'm curious. Was WrestleMania 3 Detroit the largest arena you've been in, or have you been in that was like 90-something thousand.
93,000. That and the one up in Canada was 70,000. But the 93,000 was the biggest event. I mean, I think they might have had more, but they might have been in Europe, at the soccer stadiums. You see, like Bruce Springsteen goes to these places and they get 120,000 people, and you think, holy smokes, But, the fact that that WrestleMania, and it was funny because Brian and I, went against the Sheik, and Volkov, and there really wasn't a program, or any sort of idea that we were going to, wrestle on and on and on. And what they used our match for was to get Jim Duggan over, because as you recall, at the end of the match, we false finished them a couple times, and they came in and they kicked us off or whatever, and then they false finished us, and then all of a sudden Jim Duggan comes in with his 2x4 and he cleans house, and we get disqualified. And this is what George Scott told us. He was booking in New York, and I don't know, here we go. So he said, I want you and Brian to be happy that Jim Duggan, got you disqualified. And I said, are you kidding? So we had to, pat Jim Duggan on the back, for helping him save us. And I thought, holy Jesus. But that was typical, But it was fun. It took us about 6 weeks to get paid. And you think, what do you think we made on that? What would you think?
WrestleMania?
Yeah, on that night when they had 90.
Got to be thousands of dollars. It got to be a big event. Yeah,
$10,000.
Wow.
That wasn't that. We should have made $50,000 apiece. Everybody should have made $50,000. They made, I don't know, $25-30 million on the TV, everything, and they paid Hulk $1 million, they paid Andre $1 million, and then I think they paid a couple other guys. We're getting $250,000, and the rest of us $10,000.
Wow. On the flip side, what's the smallest or weirdest arena you ever had to wrestle in?
Well, this was probably the most. It was the hardest match that Brian and I had, and it was in Puerto Rico, and it was during a thunderstorm, and we were wrestling Barry Orton and Mike Sharp, and they put us on last because Hulk had to wrestle before the storm came. So we're wrestling, and honest to God, fella, I'm not kidding you, there was 2 inches of water in the ring, and we couldn't even walk. And you can see that on YouTube too. And it was just unbelievable. I couldn't. My boots were wet for 2 weeks. I couldn't get them dry, and we went through that match. And thank God nobody got hurt, because there was this much water in the ring, and we finally got the match over with. And we went about 12 or 15 minutes, and you had to look like this to see your partner in the ring, because it was raining so hard. And then when we took off, we're in a DC-10. It got hit by lightning. Yeah, and we take off out of San Juan, and he makes a bank, and all of a sudden you see this flash, and the plane goes, and then boom. And about that time, my rear end bit a hole in the seat because I was so scared, I couldn't get up.
Well, you in planes is kind of crazy.
Oh, well, I tell you, I was afraid of flying, and my dad was a pilot for 30 years in the Navy, and I had a couple bad flights, and I'll never forget, I took a flight down to Cherokee, Iowa, and it was Ric Flair, and it was what the heck is his name? It was Buddy Wolf's partner, and I'm trying to think. I'll probably think of his name at 2:00 in the morning tonight. But he was a licensed pilot, and we had a single engine plane, and there was 4 seats, and actually there was 2 seats and then me in the back. So we're flying to Cherokee, Iowa, which was about 205 miles. And as we get into Cherokee, Iowa, there are big thunderstorms all over the place. Horrible. And I thought, oh, Jesus, God, and he's all of a sudden we hit a downdraft. And when we hit a downdraft, we went from about 3,000 feet to about 500 feet. And I'm sitting in this jump seat, and the jump seat collapsed. It went boom, and I'm laying upside down in the back seat. And I said, oh, God, this is it. Lord, please. So I'm trying to think of his name, doggone it. He finally landed the plane. And I said, oh, and Ric was in a plane crash, in North Carolina. And I remember getting out of the plane, and I told him, I says, how much is the plane going to be in? He says, $200. And I gave him $200. I said, I'm driving home, because I wouldn't get back on the plane with him again. But that was just, that. And then we had, I wasn't in the plane in the one from where Mad Dog opened the door.
Yeah.
But we had a lot of flights that were, either hit by lightning or horrible inclement weather, tornadoes and 60-mile-an-hour winds. And
if you had to pick just one match against someone that you had to face, who was your favorite wrestler, favorite person to work with?
God, there's a couple. Nick Bockwinkel and I used to have incredible matches. We had, again, 3-hour draws, and he taught me a lot about wrestling. And he was a baby face to begin with, and then turned heel, and he was one of the best wrestling heels there was. I mean, he was 6'2", 245, and he and Dory Funk had a old-timers match in Georgia, and it was a pay-per-view, and they stole the show. They had by far the best match, but I would say Bob Orton Jr. Was probably, he was one of the best. He was the best out of my group, and then there was Rick Steamboat. Flair was incredible. And the guy that, when I was in the WWF, who I looked at and watched all the time, was Jake Roberts. Jake the Snake Roberts had incredible timing in the ring. Everything he did in the ring looked good. And he was just masterful, and he was another guy who had, some, knock on wood, with substance abuse, but he's turned his life around, and I've seen him a couple times, and I still, he talks like this, and he's Brunzell, Jake, how you doing? You got any 8 balls lately? And I said, no. But he's straightened out pretty good, which is good. But yeah, it's him, Bret Hart. Bret Hart was a real good worker. Matter of fact, Bret Hart and I had a couple Broadway draws. One in I think it was Philadelphia at the Spectrum, and it was incredible. It was. And then we had one at Madison Square Garden, a 30-minute draw, and he was really good.
You had a couple run-ins with the Hart Foundation, yeah.
Well, we were supposed to take the belts from them. This is what we'd been promised by Vince, and Jimmy Hart was their manager, and Bret was excellent, but Jim Neidhart, like I said, he was like a hand grenade. You never know when he was going to blow up in the ring. So yeah, I was very fortunate. We had some.
Speaking of Jimmy, did you ever get to that Memphis crew, Lawler and any of those guys? Were you ever wrestling with Double Jarrett and all them?
We did wrestle, and I'm trying to think. It was Greg and I. We wrestled somebody down there in a tag team match. And we had a hell of a match with them, too. And it wasn't anybody on top. It was just sort of, I think Lawler was doing Vern a favor or something. I don't know. But Jerry Lawler, made a lot of money. And he was the only 210-pound guy that I ever saw that wrestled like he was 300 pounds and got away with it.
Arrogant guy.
Oh, God, the king. Yeah, he was something.
I'd love to chat. Staying in Minneapolis, what is it about Minneapolis that you love? What's kept you around this beautiful place?
Well, it's my hometown. My mom and dad are from St. Paul. I was raised, even though I traveled all over as my dad was a pilot, I lived out in the Marshall Islands, Kwajalein, and then California, and Memphis, Tennessee, and Olathe, Kansas. But we always came back to Minneapolis. And when you think of it, even though the worst thing about Minnesota is the damn winters, because they're just they're getting worse and they last so long. But the quality of life the education, the job opportunities, and the medical, help that you can get in this state is second to none. There's no place like Minneapolis, and it's funny because a lot of guys from the University of Minnesota football, when they got recruited and they came here, they all stayed here because some of them came from dirt homes, down in Memphis, Tennessee, they had a dirt floor. And they get here and they, get their degree and they get great jobs and, and it's a great place. Crime is bad all over, and I don't care where you go. And it's, there's a lot of reasons for that, and, I wish I knew all the answers, but Minneapolis is a great place. If you have an opportunity, there's some great places to eat around here. They used to have the Market Barbecue. God, they used to have incredible ribs and wings, but I think it closed down now. And then I'm trying to think of the strip joint they have down here that it's really good. I haven't been to it in years, but my lawyer goes to it quite a bit. He's got a couple girlfriends there. But, oh gosh, maybe Jimmy know the name of it, but it's right down by the Target Center, kitty corner from the Target Center. And other than that, St. Paul, I still have a lot of friends that, matter of fact, I'm having lunch tomorrow with a sports writer from St. Paul. His name's Charlie Walters, and then a teammate of mine, two teammates of mine, Jim Carter, who played with me at Minnesota and was the captain of the team my junior year, and then he played with Green Bay Packers for 9 years. And he took Ray Nitschke's, the middle linebacker's job away from him.
Wow.
And the people hated him for it. But he was a tough son of a gun. So we're having lunch tomorrow, and then there was a tight end who wound up in Seattle, Washington. His name was Tom Benneman from the Gophers, and he was like 6'7" and about 245, and he was a funny guy, great guy. So he's going to have lunch with us tomorrow too. So we get together, with some of these guys, and it's fun. And then I've been working with the University of Minnesota M Club at the stadium for 15 years, and my wife and I have been doing that, and it's sort of fun. You get to see your old teammates and reminisce and say how good and great you were. And
that football scene in Minneapolis, when you guys, late 60s, that's the Purple People Eaters. This was a hot hub of football. Did you ever get to meet any of the Purple People Eater football players, like Paige or any of them?
Let me see. Well, I've been at dinners with them before, and I knew Jeff Wright, who was a strong safety. He was my teammate in Minnesota. He played in 3 Super Bowls.
Wow.
And he was starting strong safety. And I'm trying to think. I knew a linebacker, a couple linebackers from him. And I'd see those guys, after the season where the wrestlers would be at an event where they had other athletes, and we'd say hi and everything. But the Vikings, though, the only trouble with the Vikings was that they lost 4 Super Bowls, and they broke our hearts every dang time. They should have won the very first Super Bowl against Kansas City that they were in. Then they got their ass kicked, by the Raiders, and and the Pittsburgh killed them, and so it was a shame. And they had some great teams, and I remember Fran Tarkenton was a favorite of mine, and it was hopefully now this year, they're 7-1, but there's so many people that don't even want to think of, going to the Super Bowl because they couldn't. I think the only other team is the Buffalo Bills. They've lost 4 or 5. They've the same amount as we have, 4, and you get that losing appetite, and it's hard to get rid of.
Bills Vikings Super Bowl this year would be nice.
Yeah, well, they're playing the Bills this weekend. I think. Is it this week? Yeah. But their quarterback is hurt. The Bills quarterback, who I think it's funny because you watch football now, and the two most entertaining teams was the Bills and the Chiefs, and I could watch the Chiefs play every night. That quarterback, that Mahomes, is just incredible. You watch him and you think, how the hell does he do? I mean, he looks like he's making up a play in the huddle where he runs around here and then he'll throw back here and then you throw it back to me and I'll throw it deep. It's incredible.
Jim, you've been doing a lot of Comic Cons these last few years.
Yes.
Do you have a favorite fan experience, whether it's meeting someone there or back in the day, like crazy fans entering rings or anything like that?
Oh, geez, I don't want any of those fans coming in the ring because they might not like you. But, I've been blessed, like I said. We've, out of all the encounters that I've had with fans, I've had very few guys that turn out to be assholes. Most of them are good people, and they enjoy us and they like what we do in the ring, and there's no better compliment.